Hi, everyone, and welcome to Teaching Nonviolent Atonement. My name is Adam Erickson.
Hi, I'm Suzanne.
Hi,
Ross.
Suzanne, you are Suzanne Ross, and I see your name right up there. That's awesome. That's good. Today happens to be Ascension Day, May 29th, Ascension Day. And I am often interested in Ascension Day because it basically gets ignored in the Christian calendar.
Yeah, doesn't it? And
Yeah.
in Christian theology, really, it's not made. We talk about the cross, and we talk about Jesus' birth and his death and his resurrection and his ministry, but the ascension, it's sort of like, woo, we skirt over
I know.
it.
And one of the things that's interesting about this is that in early Christianity, Ascension Day was thought to be crucially important. In fact, Augustine in the 5th century said that it was like the climax of the Christian year. And since then, we've basically forgotten about it.
Why?
Isn't that
Why
thing that it was so important, and now it's just like the ugly stepchild of Christian calendar.
So why is that, Adam? Why do you think it should be more important now?
I do. I think that we should give the Ascension Day much more importance than we do, which is basically to ignore it. And there are many reasons why I think that it's important. First is that Christian tradition has said that on the Ascension, Jesus sits at the right hand of God.
Yeah.
And the right hand of God is seen as some kind of position of power or authority. This is what the right hand of God means. And what it means, I think, for Christians is that even though Jesus is no longer physically here on earth, that Jesus is still Lord of our lives. Jesus is still Lord of the church and indeed Lord of the world. And this is so important for the early Christians because they would walk around saying Jesus is Lord, which meant that all other lords of the world were not. Like, who are you going to give your full allegiance to? Is it Jesus or is it the other lords of the earth? And that's one of the reasons that I think Ascension Day and sitting at the right hand of God is so important. Of course, what Jesus does with the power of God is flip our understanding of what power means. Usually we think of power as coercion or violence, power over and against someone else, but the lordship of Jesus puts that around. You know, that passage where Jesus says in Mark chapter 10, I think it is, that the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve. Like, this is what the lordship of Jesus is all about, to be a servant in the world. So that's one reason.
Yeah, it's so interesting because, when I traveled to Israel about almost 10 years ago now with our church, and in Jerusalem they have all these sites where you're supposed to visit, like especially Bethlehem is supposed to be, the Church of the Manger is there where Jesus was supposedly born, and you're supposed to go into the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem, and you can reach in this little dark hole. It's sort of like an Indiana Jones kind of thing. You think there's going to be bugs in there or something, and touch where the cross was supposedly mounted, in the ground. And the group I was with, we were like, we're not feeling it. These do not feel like spiritual sights to us at all. But when we went to the site where the Ascension, where Jesus supposedly ascended from, it's near the Mount of Olives, near the Garden of Gethsemane. And it's at the top of the hill, and it overlooks Jerusalem. And there's this little church there that a mosque was built around it, and it's got this really long history. But there's what looks like a heel print in the stone. And you're supposed to go in there and put your heel, you can put your heel in the same spot. And we're like, oh, yeah, whatever. We just come from the Holy Sepulchre place, and we felt nothing. So we all go in there, one after another, into this little round space, and we put our foot in the spot, and we come back out, and we're looking at each other going, oh, my God. It's something happened here. You know that expression, thin places, where the boundary between this world and the next is very thin? We just felt like, even though the Ascension really, like you were saying, really meant nothing to us, we didn't really have how does it connect with our love of Jesus and whatever. I don't know how to explain it, Adam, but we should probably take the Ascension a little more seriously, because there was something quite real about that place.
Oh, very much so. Hearing you talk about like the mosque that was around that area reminds me that Muslims have a very similar view of Muhammad's ascension on the night journey that he took. And there is in Jerusalem a footprint supposedly of where Muhammad did this in Jerusalem up to the heavens.
Yeah.
So that's an interesting connection that I've never realized before, that I didn't make before. But the other thing that's really interesting about that is that in the story in Acts, I believe it's chapter 1, right? The disciples ask Jesus, is this now the time that you are going to restore the kingdom of Israel? And Jesus says it's not for you to know. And one of the things that many Girardians say about this is that here are the disciples, when Jesus comes back in the resurrection, they're still expecting him to wield the sword, come back and take over the political atmosphere. But this is not, Jesus says it's not time. It's not the time for you. The time is not for you to know. And then because he comes in service, they still are thinking power and not service towards their fellow human beings. And then when Jesus is lifted up, when he ascends, they all start looking up. And this is the other thing that I think is so important about Ascension, that the Ascension Day has to tell us, is that our theology can often get stuck in looking up to heaven. And we neglect the very, as you were saying in your reflection, the very real aspect of what's happening here on earth. As they're looking up, two angels come to them and say, what are you doing looking up? And they basically get them to look forward. Like, Jesus is not here anymore. He's in heaven, still Lord of our lives, which means that we have very real work to do here on earth. So don't get stuck looking to the heavens. Look forward. Look at your fellow human beings, and how are you going to love them in the way that Jesus loved us?
Right. And there is something about Jesus revealing who God is to us, right? Jesus ascends to sit at the right hand of God, meaning there's something about who God is that we can only know through who Jesus is. And Jesus was, what's very important to you and me is that Jesus was a victim of human violence. And when Jesus will come back to us, those angels say, hey, he's going to come back from where he went, meaning we are going to begin to see God in our victims. I think that is the new opening up of what's being made, what's opening up by the ascension of heaven coming down to us almost. I don't know. It's very hard to talk about these mystical things.
No, it's great because, heaven coming down to us, this is the incarnation. This is where heaven and earth meet in the incarnation of Jesus. And hearing you talk about the angels say, in the same way that Jesus was lifted up, he will come back down. And
Yeah.
he was the victim, and it's so important to point out James Allison's book, Jesus the Forgiving Victim. So he is the victim who comes in the spirit of forgiveness, not in the spirit of power, in the spirit of forgiveness. This is the dynamis, I guess, the power of the Holy Spirit that flips our views of power over and against, of violence and power on its head, whereas God's power, the dynamis of the Holy Spirit, is the spirit of forgiveness, the power to forgive and to love. This is what Jesus, the forgiving victim, in the same way Jesus as the forgiving victim was ascended, will come back down to us in the same exact way. There is no difference. Jesus is the same yesterday, today, and into the future, as Hebrews tells us. A lot of times people want to say that when Jesus comes back, this is when Jesus is going to do what the disciples wanted him to do and take over Jerusalem with violence. But in the same way that Jesus was ascended, he will come back in the same way as the spirit of forgiveness.
In love and forgiveness.
So those are all the reasons so those are all of the reasons that I think that we need to reclaim Ascension Day and as an important day in the Christian calendar.
Yeah, I think it's a wonderful time for us to allow ourselves to enter into what you might call the empty spaces in scriptures, where everything isn't completely laid out for us, but where we can enter in and begin to let our imaginations be shaped by the contemplation of this mystery.
I love it. Awesome. Well, that was a lot of fun, Suzanne. Thank you very much.
That was fun, Adam.
Okay, we'll talk to you soon.
Bye-bye.